Akil Verghese is the co-founder and CEO of Krazimo, an enterprise AI engineering firm that builds reliable AI systems and automation for businesses that want real-world, productivity-ready results. With that, Akil, we're thrilled to have you at the live event today, and I am very much looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I'm super excited to present what we've learned from working with companies on adopting AI at scale at enterprise. This conversation and this presentation is all about adopting AI at scale. And it's sort of to highlight the very large gap that exists between a really cool demo, which I've seen many of, and truly valuable, positive ROI deployed AI at scale. And I've been working at Krazimo with companies to adopt these systems for a while, and these are just some of the lessons that we've picked up along the way. So let me start by saying that in the last 5 months, we have seen real ROI being seen among companies where we've deployed AI solutions. And this is all to say the opportunity is real. So the narrative that real AI doesn't exist, that it's not being deployed at scale, that is definitely incorrect. However, it is only in the last 4 to 5 months that we've seen it. So it's a fairly recent thing that we've seen real positive ROI and measurable results. So it's quite a recent thing. And so anyone that's telling you it's already too late, that's also definitely incorrect. Now, the gap between something that makes a cool demo and something that is a trusted enterprise system is quite extensive. So with AI, it is quite possible to build a customer service system, a sales system in about a day, right? Cloud Code will do it for you. It will answer some of your questions. It will seem really cool. And especially if they curate the examples, it can seem like, wow, you've done this in a day, in a week, it'll be perfect. The truth is very, very far from that. As far as I've seen, to deploy truly useful solutions, even in the most obvious applications of AI, like AI SDRs and customer service problems, it often takes months and months of work to deploy a system that is truly useful. And these are some of the differences. So demos work well in a controlled environment. So it identifies a few happy parts that, make for good examples. It obviously assumes that the data is in the format that it wants. It doesn't worry about things like permissions and workflows and exceptions and access and mistakes and things like that. Now, all of this, the exact opposite of this is all required in a trusted enterprise system. You have to deal with the real world edge cases and so on. And so I want to talk about how you go from a cool demo to something that you can actually deploy in your company. And the way I see it is deploying reliable AI at scale involves 7 steps. So there's the evaluation phase, and this is something that not enough people do. So it's understanding the real job fully. Very often, the person implementing the solution to the AI hasn't understood how your company is performing the task right now, and you need to understand it in complete detail. You cannot automate something you do not understand. And this is a particular challenge when AI engineers are attempting to automate legal work, compliance work, and stuff like that, because it really does require them to take the time to understand how those things are done from the lawyer, from the compliance officer, from the doctor, if you're automating medical notes. And in the past, that's what I've seen has been required. Obviously, you're never going to be as good as the people doing that job, but you really do have to understand the process. Number two is, again, something that I see people miss all the time is define success. If you haven't defined success, you should not start any of the other steps because you just don't know when you're doing something well or not. Number three is identify all of the knowledge that is required to perform the task right now. And I'm going to give you examples for all of these across two criteria. And number four is identify risks. So understand what could happen during misuse, what could go wrong. Number five is building the guardrails to ensure that those things don't go wrong. So those could be system-based guardrails that are deterministic. They could be human-based guardrails, meaning human oversight is inserted in certain steps. Finally, you have to launch in phases. And then after the launch is done, you need to monitor how it's performing regularly. So I'm going to go over these one by one, and I'm going to take two of the most common examples. So AI sales development representatives and customer service, right? So first step is evaluation. So for an AI sales agent, you need to like map out the full sales flow. You need to talk to sales representatives within the company. You need to understand every single source for leads. So you need to understand like what comes from LinkedIn outreach, what comes from Instagram ads, what comes from people hitting the website, and then identify exactly where AI could add value. So identify all the opportunities. Similarly, with customer service, you need to talk to the agents and the team leads and the operation owners. You need to understand all the questions and escalations and categorize them. You need to understand all the like information requests and what are the workflows that happen in resolving those beyond just answering questions. Because the truth about customer service is, yeah, you can build something that answers questions about your policies in a day, but no one comes to customer service to have questions answered about their policies. They come to customer service to get something fixed. And this is where, full knowledge of the entire workflow and the tools involved and that are used by customer service today becomes so crucial. Number two, obviously, you have to define what success looks like. So for a sales person, you have to understand what is the current meeting book rate, how many leads are they getting, how many of those convert to meetings, how many of those convert to qualified leads, what is the response rate by each channel. So you have to categorize them separately along LinkedIn, Instagram. You have to understand the growth rate over the last few months. And then you have to understand once this initial, like the outbound person converts it to an inbound sales for closing, what is their success rate? So even if, let's say, for example, a bot, like a human was connecting you to a salesperson to close it at a rate of 10%, and now a bot comes in and does it as 12%. It may look like the bot is doing better, but if when you actually talk to that person, they're not a well-validated customer and the conversion on the closing calls goes down, then the fact that you've gone up from 10 to 12% is invaluable. So you really need to define success at each point in the pipeline, at each different channel, and similar things for customer service. It's all about the resolution rate. You get customer satisfaction where relevant. You have to categorize every single possible outcome of the interaction. And with customer service, there's a bunch of different negative possibilities. So it could be negative because the person or the bot didn't have access to the right information. It could be negative because the person or the bot had access to the right information but didn't present it in an emotionally intelligent way. They didn't understand the customer's frustration and didn't interact with them well. It could be negative because they had the right information, they presented it properly, but the customer is just unhappy with the policy. And that may be something that no one can fix, because they just are unhappy with the way your company works. And maybe that's something that you evaluate, but that's not something that customer service can fix because it has to be corrected at a policy level. And then, of course, you have to and test how to what extent your customer service is abiding with policies today. So number three is probably the most complicated aspect of deploying AI at scale at enterprise is like understanding all the tools and knowledge that needs to be accessed. So for sales, it's like the CRMs, the lead lists, the Apollo connections, the calendar that you have to book on, you have to understand the invoices, the pricing, and no AI SDR is useful unless it's connected to all of these tools. Similarly, for customer service, it has to have access to the order database. It needs to know what your policies are. It needs to understand all articles from the help center. It has to be able to access the account details of the person asking the question because you have to look at their status and answer questions accordingly. And you may have separate policies that are allowed for people who are gold customers, but not for people who are silver customers and so on. Access to all of these tools and knowledge sources is absolutely crucial to truly implementing a useful solution with AI. So yeah, and it's absolutely essential that the customer service bot has access to all of this information in order to for things to actually work well. Now, the next thing is identifying all the ways that this could go wrong, right? So when you've got a sales agent, you could give inaccurate claims, you could reach out to the wrong audience, you could damage your brand by having bad tone, you could give in order to make the sale, it could make promises that your company isn't able to keep. Similarly, for customer service, you could give answers that deviate from the policy. You could, make promises again that, to give refunds and stuff that your customer isn't willing to honor. So there's a lot of areas for risk. In addition to that, when you look at all of the tools and the data that it has access to, it could mishandle that data. And that's also super crucial, where you don't want the customer service. Obviously, you don't want it to promise anything that you don't want to deliver on, but you don't want it to share details from customer A with customer B. And that would be a major violation, especially if you're handling customer service for a medical practice or, something where it's really critical. Now, you have to identify all the ways to mitigate these risks. And those ways vary from having a human oversight over anything that is particularly important. So if the agent is making a promise on a sales call, you can have a human have to like take over at that point. Or if a refund is being issued by a customer service agent, before any refund can be issued, a human oversight may be required. Or there may be certain deterministic barriers that only allow things to happen within certain guardrails. So if someone has been a customer for 10 years or has a goal plan, maybe a refund up to $300 is allowed without any human oversight, but anything beyond that needs to require human oversight. This is this is maybe the place that requires the most effort, and people don't, and it ties back to step 4, which is identifying all of the tools, because you have to understand all the tools, all the data, all of the sort of power that this agent has, and then carefully label every single one of those pieces of data, every single API call within the tool, and control exactly how much access the agent has, and ensure that it either gets human oversight or very strict deterministic guardrails to ensure it doesn't exceed those limits. Sorry, so this is step 5, like building the guardrails. Like once you've understood, I kind of covered this in the last slide, once you've understood all of those, the harm that can happen, you really need to start building guardrails around blocking it. Finally, nearly every good AI solution is launched in phases. You first do it in shadow mode, where it essentially does the same task that the human is doing now, and you try to, if this is not always possible for every solution, like it may not be that possible for sales and customer service, because obviously depending on what the human says, the AI, like the conversation can deviate into a bunch of different streams. But you could have it basically receive all of the human communications externally and ensure that it more or less matches with what your salesperson is doing or what your customer service person is doing. Second is like have a human in the loop. So you can deploy these systems with a human verifying every step of the way. And essentially, the success criteria there would be the human editing it on fewer than, say, 2% of all interactions. And then deploying it on a narrow production scope, rolling it out gradually before you do a general release. So, like with an AI SDR thing, you can start drafting messages for qualification, but then have them reviewed by a human. You can automate the campaign with like tight controls. You can, like launch it just on LinkedIn or just on like 1/10 of the outreach on LinkedIn. You can have it respond to 1/10 of the incoming messages on Instagram, stuff like that. So a gradual phase thing. Similarly for customer service, you could identify maybe 10 problems that your customer service people generally solve. You could have a classifier that identifies if this is one of those problems and then direct those to an AI, whereas all of the others can keep going to a human. And obviously everyone will have the option to kind of exit the loop and talk to a human if they are getting frustrated during the launch phase. And then finally, this is another area where people really fall short, is that you think that once this is all done, then you're just done. And that's just not remotely true. Like monitoring, like policies change over time, circumstances change over time, your abilities change over time. You need to continuously monitor everything. All of the success metrics we talked about early on step 2 that you identify cannot be abandoned after you have deployed the solution. They need to be monitored continuously and managed for any deviation, and any drift in the performance needs to be identified and fixed as soon as possible. So yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. Like the opportunity is real. I don't want this slide to make it seem like though it's just so complicated to deploy an AI solution that there's no point trying. The opportunity is real. We have seen real ROI, but it's not about flashy demos. It's about identifying so much of the work is actually not AI work. It's about identifying the risks, identifying the tools, mapping them out correctly, understanding the workflows, installing guardrails. All of this is standard software engineering. So I don't want any of this to sort of dissuade you from like adopting AI. I would say the second biggest mistake you can make today is deploying AI badly, but the biggest mistake is not starting at all. And so definitely try it out, experiment. But this kind of roadmap will be a good structure to ensure that you deploy AI that you can actually trust to represent your company adequately, especially if it's going to be customer facing. Thank you.
Thank you for that great presentation. For everyone that's listening in live, coming up at the top of the hour on the next Q&A panel, we will have a opportunity for everyone to submit questions for Akil. So you have a Q&A box in front of you. Type any of your questions into the box now, and we'll get to as many of those as we can on the live panel.